funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, water supply drying up. The changes one Rio Grande engineer says must be made to counter the drought.
I think that we have enough infrastructure on this river to not just weather it, but hopefully to thrive. But there's a lot of work to be done.
Plus, recapping the key primary races and what those results could mean heading into the general election. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Water supplies in the Middle Rio Grande are dwindling with warnings that soon downstream farmers might not have access to the water they need. In the second half of the show, environment reporter Laura Paskus talks to a chief engineer in that area to ask why the situation has become so dire. As we cope with the effects of exceptional drought, we're bracing for the possibility of flooding. Now, burn scars left in the path of some of the largest fires in state history have created a serious risk. We'll talk about preparations with our line opinion panel at the bottom of the hour. But we start with a focus on your vote. 1 in 4 eligible New Mexico voters cast a ballot on primary Tuesday. Senior producer Lou DeVizio talks with Common Cause New Mexico about changes that expanded voting access this year. And of course, political analysis on Tuesday's results. Let's get to the line. We have a great group this week. Talk about what happened on primary election day. Welcome back to former New Mexico State Senator Dee Dee Feldman. Former state representative and House Minority Whip at the time, Daniel Foley, joins us again. And finally, my man Dave Mulryan, founder of Everybody Votes New Mexico. We always like to have Dave on after an election. Now, we're going to touch on as many of the big races as we can. And then a little bit later in the show, we'll focus our attention ahead for the general election. But the headline after the primary was former weatherman Mark Ronchetti's big win, taking the Republican nomination for governor. Daniel, let me start with you here. How did he pull off such an overwhelming victory considering he got 58% of the vote with a fairly crowded field?
I think there's multiple things to talk about. First of all, Gene, and you know I always take shots at you, and we're good friends. You know, do you introduce U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan as former blackjack dealer, former Ben Ray Lujan? So I think people aren't buying the myth that he's just weatherman Ronchetti, right? I think that was a big push, and I think he did a good job of getting out around the state and letting people see, you know, maybe the weatherman isn't just a weatherman. I think also I think what's interesting was to see all this talk nationally about everybody running towards President Trump and being a Trump guy, and that everybody, you know, there's a lot of media talk about everybody in New Mexico on this Trump bandwagon on the Republican side, and yet clearly, Mark Ronchetti was able to straddle that fence, right? He wasn't anti-Trump, but he wasn't all in with Trump. And, he won an overwhelming victory. I think I think he had a dominant performance in the primary. And I think more importantly, here's the key is, we hear about all the fights that are going on that primaries caused. But I think what happened with Ronchetti is he ran 10 ads during the primary, 10 TV ads. 7 of those ads were general election ads. 4 of those 7 were contrast ads with Michelle Lujan Grisham. So, with the governor. So I think that, I think while everybody else was trying to position, I think there's a lot to be said for showing up and assuming you're the nominee. I do think one of the big takeaways, as we were talking off camera, and I'll bring it up here, is how in the world does a guy not even get on the ballot at the Republican pre-primary convention and then get 58% of the vote in the primary? It shows you that 1, the party is flawed and dysfunctional, and 2, that this whole pre-primary convention thing, it's time to go, right? I mean, you can't have 600-700 people making decisions for 300,000 people in New Mexico. They clearly are not representative of the majority of the people in the party because, this guy, I mean, he didn't even gather enough votes to get on there. Thank God there's a way to get on there. And he got on there and he overwhelmingly won in the primary. So I think he's positioned very well going into the general election. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. I would say, literally today or yesterday, I think the RGA was up with ads against Governor Grisham. And I can't remember another time that within a day or two of the election that the people going after them, especially on the Republican side, was up this early with a candidate. So they must feel really good about Ronchetti's chances.
I have to agree. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's an interesting point. Let's talk about Rebecca Dow, Senator Feldman. I have to personally confess, I was a little shocked she only gathered 15% of the vote. And I've been talking about this with a lot of people. A lot of folks come down to the idea that she sort of hurt herself with the way she came out of the gate, her ads, all that kind of thing, so strong against Ronchetti. In your opinion, what went wrong there for the representative? Because something didn't quite take hold with the electorate on the Republican side here.
Well, I just think she was overwhelmed by Ronchetti's celebrity, his fame. He's well known to New Mexicans, and legislators always think that they're better known than they really are.
Fair point.
And then her advertisement on horseback about immigrants, they were pretty dark and pretty threatening about how the sky was falling. Then she got attacked tremendously by Ronchetti. This was a big surprise to me, how somebody who was like 25, maybe more points ahead, would do a very hard-charging negative campaign against Dow, basically saying she harbored sexual predators in her business, and it was a threat to preschool children. And that was pretty unnecessary, I thought, on the part of Ronchetti. And all those ads that Dan mentioned, there were a lot of ads, but most of them were negative. They were either negative against Michelle Lujan Grisham, or they were negative and very negative against Dow. So I think that she had to use some of her money to respond to that sexual predator harborer ad, and that's always a waste.
Interesting point there. I'd forgotten about that in the scrum of all these ads. I forgot all about that. Dave Mulryan, I'm going to button down this, and we're going to move on to the district attorney's race. But in your sense of where Mr. Trump fits into the dialogue, Dan mentioned this. What was your sense of how Ms. Dow approached that and trying to use that as a hammer against Mr. Ronchetti?
Let's go a little bit bigger here. I think the big story out of the Dow, Ronchetti, Trump, Republican governor race is that everybody was wrong. Nobody really has a good feel for the electorate, except, of course, Dan was right. He warned us, right? We knew that. But I think that Trump is just this wild card. I mean, he's a three-dimensional wild card. We never know which way it can go. You can win by, hitching your star to him. You can win by ignoring him. We just don't know. I mean, he's just such a wild card. But I think that the misunderstandings, the miscalculations that the Republican Party doesn't understand their electorate, that, in general, the pundits, all of us don't seem to understand the electorate, and the electorate just decides what they're going to do, and they do it. They don't care what we think. They don't care what anyone thinks. It's just really, I think it's really actually fascinating. I don't know how you politic or you campaign and figure that in. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And if I knew, I would tell everybody, but I don't.
And just say, hey, if anybody does, let us know. Senator Feldman, Bernalillo County DA Raul Torres wins the Democratic nomination for Attorney General. The knock on him, of course, was crime in Albuquerque, the big knock, but voters don't seem to blame him. It's kind of the same way Mayor Keller wasn't necessarily blamed for crime here, too. Are people right to not be blaming individuals for these crime issues? It's complex, certainly, but in politics, usually someone pays somewhere. Not this time around. What was your sense of it?
Well, I think that voters are becoming a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to crime, at least Democratic voters. And so they know that there are, as Tim Keller said, a lot of moving parts here. But remember, the voters did elect the prosecutor. They did elect the prosecutor. So even though he was attacked for being a bad prosecutor, when given the choice between a prosecutor and a insider, so to speak, which is the way Raul Torres tried to portray Brian Colon, they picked the prosecutor. I think it's really misguided there because the Attorney General is not a prosecutor. That is not the job of the Attorney General. The Attorney General really is much more of an administrator concerned with ethics, transparency, civil law rather than criminal law. It's really the courts and the DAs that play much more in that arena.
Dan, real quick, go ahead, if you would.
Go ahead. Sorry, Gene, go ahead.
Just real quick, I want to get your thoughts on what Dee Dee just mentioned, but I got another subject I want to put to you as well.
Go ahead, give me the subject. I'll work them in.
Mr. Colon, what did he do wrong there? What didn't work for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in politics, as we all know, it's always death of a thousand cuts, right? It's rarely, I mean, short of murder or something like that, it's rarely that's the one thing. I think what really hurt him was not giving ground when that father came on and said, "Stop using my son in your ads."
Gotcha.
I think that really touched a lot of people. I would think, he and not only did he not take it out, it got brought up in the debate, and he took a hardline stance saying, I'm going to do it anyway. I thought it was interesting to see that Raul, who, by my standards is a fairly progressive individual, I would put him in the progressive camp of the Democrat Party. I mean, he beat Brian Colon in places like Chaves County.
Right.
I mean, progressives don't normally do well in places like Chaves County, even among Democrats. And, I mean, Raul, he seemed to really get it together. And to Dee Dee's point, I think the people, regardless of what you think the AG's job is, I think people believe he's the top cop, and he is responsible for fixing crime. And I think, it's clear that whether you're a bad prosecutor or a good prosecutor, having prosecutorial experience over political experience means something when you're running for Attorney General. What I do think moving forward is I do think this primary really opens up an opportunity for potentially the Republican candidate running for Attorney General in New Mexico.
That's going to be interesting. Hey, Dave, real quick, a group backed by former GOP Chair Harvey Yates bankrolled a lot of moderate Democratic candidates for the State House. Very interesting. Hoping to take some of the thunder out of the progressive options off the table before the Journal, I would imagine. Many of those candidates lost, though. What does that say to you, that lack of success?
Money can't buy you love or votes. I mean, in some ways. And I think that, just throwing money at a problem, although if you're throwing it my way, it's fine, but it tends not to work. People really aren't fooled, And I like the idea. I mean, I think that moderation in some ways is a good thing. This isn't the way to do it, as we learned and stuff. So it's just, I think that, as a strategy, it makes sense. But I don't know. You just cannot just throw money at it and hope it'll work, because it tends not to.
So you always got to question why the former Republican National Committee man is playing around in Democrat primaries, right? I mean,
yes.
I mean, is it really because you care about the level of Democrat candidates being elected, or is it because it really helps you in your business? I would argue in some cases it's the latter.
Good points there. Thank you to our lineup. Go ahead, Dee Dee, real quick, if you would.
I just want to say that the progressives that he was attacking and that he funded, rather, these were basically three women from up north, progressive incumbents, and they were incumbents, and they won, as incumbents usually do. They were also funded by and were part of the speaker's race in the House, and they were funded by Patricia Lundstrom, who is wanting to move up there.
Good points there. I'm glad you got that in. Thank you to our Line Opinion panel. We'll meet you all back here in less than 10 minutes, actually, to talk about the general election. Right now, let's send things over to senior producer Lou DeVizio. He caught up with Mario Jimenez, campaign director at Common Cause, New Mexico, to ask how Election Day went across the state.
Joining me today via Zoom is Mario Jimenez. He's the campaign director at Common Cause, New Mexico. It's a nonpartisan group with a stated goal of advocating for the core values of democracy in our state. That's things like election access, integrity, and creating a representative government. Thank you for joining us today, Mario.
Thank you for having me, Lou. Appreciate it.
Of course. Now, your group had poll watchers out at various voting locations across the state on Election Day. What can you report from what they saw?
Well, in addition to that, one of the big things we ran was our 866 voter protection hotline, where we received phone calls from throughout the state, voters throughout the state, concerned citizens throughout the state, regarding the election, how it was taking place, or any questions. For a primary election, this particular one, it did go relatively smooth. We didn't hear any major issues. The majority of our phone calls that we received and assistance that was needed throughout the election was simply finding out how to return absentee ballots, where an individual can go vote, and the details of our newly implemented same-day registration.
Great. And would you say that that hotline was successful? Did it help people find the information they needed to get to the polls and do their duty?
I would say so, yes, sir. In addition to our hotline, we did collaborate with a lot of other nonpartisan organizations here in New Mexico. And one of those that I'd like to highlight is NAVA, Native American Voting Project, who really helped us get out our 866 hotline number in the Native American communities. As you may remember, in our last primary election, it was during the high times of COVID. So those communities were definitely in many ways disenfranchised due to polling locations closing. So we really wanted to focus those efforts on those communities and make sure that they did have access to a ballot so they can cast their vote.
Sure. Now, overall, we saw, according to the Secretary of State's office, 25% turnout for a primary election. How does that number compare for what you expected, what you would hope to see for a midterm primary?
Yeah, those numbers of 25% actually does track with historical numbers in a gubernatorial election. Now, for this particular gubernatorial election, we did have one of the major parties have an uncontested gubernatorial race. So I think that also led to us not having a much higher turnout. The last gubernatorial primary saw just a little bit more of 27%. But even then, that was only 1,000 more voters than what we received in yesterday's election.
Okay. Being realistic, obviously 100% is ideal, but what would you like to see ideally from a turnout number? And how would we get there other than what you guys are already doing with the voting hotlines and things like that?
Ideally, we'd love to see 60%, a minimum of 60% in elections that really shows engagement of our voters, of the residents of New Mexico. But I think another aspect of low turnout that we need to look at when we're looking at these types of elections is the individuals who are running for office. If you look up and down the ballot across all three major parties that were participating in yesterday's election, there are quite a few races that are uncontested. So a lot of these races are not going to be decided until the general election, with the exception of some of those that have only primary contestants and will not be seeing any general election opponents. So I think it's important that we continue to encourage individuals to run for office and encourage other voters to challenge the incumbents and to do a better job. With more candidates, we're going to see higher turnout.
Sure. You mentioned the recent updates in the voting procedures that you helped communicate to people, like the same-day registration, expanded absentee voting available. In terms of how those things went this year, would you say that those were positive and successful steps for our voting procedure?
I think they were tremendously successful. And, just looking at the numbers from yesterday's election, we had just a little over 10,000 New Mexicans take advantage of the newly implemented same-day registration. Now, this was a process that was taking place throughout the early voting process. So many of these individuals registered throughout the early voting process as well as election day. And so the exact number is 10,038. And we saw a large number of those individuals take advantage of that for not only the Democratic, but as well as the Republican primary election yesterday. So many of these people may have been affiliated with a minor party, such as Green Party or Independent, declined the state, or these are individuals who legitimately registered for the very first time and decided to participate in a primary election. So I think the biggest highlight of yesterday's election itself was that we had 10,000 New Mexicans who participated in this primary election who otherwise would have stayed home and not voted, or showed up to the polls and not qualified to cast their ballot.
Yeah, those are good numbers there for sure. Now, your group, it has another stated goal of reducing the influence of money in politics. The GOP nomination for governor brought in millions. The Democratic race for attorney general, with just two candidates, more than $1 million combined, was spent just in the primary. for people to understand, is this simply an issue of the big totals? Is it how the money's spent, or is it where the money's coming from? And I guess what I'm asking is, why should voters care about these big fundraising totals?
I think it's a combination of all those things you just mentioned. Money in politics really does deter your average individual from wanting to participate in the political process and run for office. New Mexico, for example, does have an unpaid legislature and was created as a citizens legislature. However, when you are pouring millions of dollars into a race for a single candidate, you're really deterring other individuals from participating in that electoral process, especially when we're talking, the big party influences. I mean, a lot of times that candidate is chosen before the election day even begins. You're seeing party politicians and you're seeing big corporations pouring money into that candidate they want. And that's how they are telling their voters, this is the person that we would like to have in that upcoming election. Please go vote for them. And I think it's important that we do the best we can to eliminate money in politics so we can have an even playing field across all candidates in all parties, in all races.
Thank you for joining us again today, Mario Jimenez, Common Cause New Mexico. One final question for you before we leave. Factoring everything in that we just talked about, how would you describe the state of democracy right now in New Mexico?
The state of democracy here in New Mexico, I would definitely describe us as a leader in democracy. During the last election throughout the pandemic, we saw many states implement reforms that are already in place here in New Mexico, such as no excuse absentee, such as voting convenience centers, such as same-day registration, expansion of early voting. These are all methods of providing access to the ballot box that New Mexico has implemented and continues to look forward in implementing forward-thinking democracy to provide access to the ballot box. So in short terms, I see New Mexico and I've always felt New Mexico is a leader in democracy, and other states should really take a look at New Mexico as an example.
Mario Jimenez, Common Cause New Mexico, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we just face almost a perfect storm. Extreme drought, infrastructure that has to be fixed, and then the debt under the Rio Grande Compact affecting the Middle Valley. And it's all coming to a head at one time.
Welcome back to our Line Opinion panelists. We're done dissecting the primary. Time to move on to the general. The race for governor is the big one, and 3 U.S. House seats are also up for a vote. Sticking with the governor's race right now, Mark Ronchetti ran away with the Republican nomination and seems to have a motivated core group behind him. Daniel, should Democrats be worried?
I think they should be real worried.
Why?
I think they should be real worried. One, if you look at the turnout in the primary over the last 10, 15 years, Democrats are vastly dropping off. In 2000, they had over 200,000 votes in the primary that were cast. This election, they had about 100. Looks like they're going to be around 130 to 140 votes cast. Republicans, for a bellwether for us, was the primary 2010 between Way and Martinez. And we had a little over 122,000. It looks like in 2022, we're going to hit or exceed that number. So what that means to me is there seems to be energy in the Republican base to get out and get involved. There doesn't seem to be as much energy in the Democrat base to get out and get involved. And the reason that I think it's even more of an example is lots of times in New Mexico, it's hard to take this information in a primary for Democrats, because Democrats rarely have highly contested primaries. They're in charge. They pretty much are running as incumbents, but they had that this year. You had a pretty contested top of the ticket Democrat primary for AG, and it didn't seem to energize individuals as much as you would think it would. With the Ronchetti situation, to come out with 58% of the vote in a primary, to come out with 58% of the vote in a 5-person race is pretty dadgum impressive. That's a rarity. And so he pulled it up. So I think it shows you that he clearly has support of Republicans, the Republican establishment behind him. I think he's going to wind up getting support. And contrary to what some bloggers want to say, you've already seen Greg Zanetti's already committed to supporting Mark Ronchetti. I think Rebecca Dow is going to support Ronchetti. I think you're going to see all energy from Republicans because I think they see an opportunity for a victory at the top of the ticket this year. So I think things are, and like we said earlier, Gene, it's just It's just stamped with at the very end. I mean, you tell me the last time that the Republican governor's campaign, the Republican Governors Association came in 2 days after an election, a primary, to take on a challenger in New Mexico and dumped money to buy to do TV buys. They got to see. Yeah. They got to see something out there as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, a good reminder here is Mr. Ronchetti was within 6 points of Ben Ray Lujan of that Senate race, so it wasn't as if he got wiped out there. Senator Feldman, interestingly, the money advantage, we got to get right to this. Governor Lujan Grisham has just over $3 million in the bank. Mr. Ronchetti spent down to about $470,000. One, does he have enough time to make up that kind of money, given what Dan was saying, with outside help as well? But two, is the governor insulated just strictly from the money? Can she spend her opponent down at this point, starting early and often?
Well, I think that's precisely why this outside money from the national Republicans is pouring in right now, because they see that Ronchetti has only $500,000 in his account, and they're going to make up the difference. And they do smell blood. I agree with Dan. But this is not, and the whole thing about the Republicans being energized this year, whereas the Democrats are not, I think that's really true nationwide. It's a typical off-year election during the middle of a presidential term. And for me, looking at the primary turnout this year, and saying, oh, the Republicans are on the upswing and the Democrats are not participating as much. Well, of course, they did not have a contest at the top of the ticket. And that's what people glom onto, not the Attorney General's race, not who's going to turn out for the treasurer's race or the auditor's race. It's the governor that captures the attention. You know, yes, the national polls and pundits still call this governor's race lean Democratic. It leans Democratic. It's not a certain Democratic seat. And that is going to galvanize the Democrats as well as the Republicans. And of course, the race in the 2nd Congressional District, where there's an opportunity to flip a Republican seat in the House, is going to garner some national attention as well from the Democrats. So I think that both sides are going to have plenty of money, and the money will flow into New Mexico, even if no matter what happens in other states, because in New Mexico, we're a cheap date. You can buy a lot. You can buy a lot of advertising if you're the Republican National Committee or if you're the House Majority Committee. So it's going to come.
Dave, I'm interested in your thoughts on the governor's race, of course. What does Governor Lujan Grisham have to do to kind of shore up her vulnerabilities, just put it that way? Is there a different message there? I only sing one
song, so let me sing it. I think if we hear of one party, either the Democrats or the Republicans, at all the levels saying, we're going to make a big push to register voters, we're going to make a big push to get out there and try and engage young people. You know, I think Michelle Lujan Grisham has done tremendous things for the state. She brought in nearly $20 billion in federal money. And, you know, but like everything, everybody only remembers what you did for them yesterday, you know, and that's what she's going to have to run on. And I think, but if we hear.
There's a lot of constituencies out there, Dave, that are, you know, not too crazy about how she handled the pandemic, how businesses suffered here. There's a lot of vulnerability, it would seem.
Right. And I think the national Democrats are not helping with this idea of defund the police and, you know, lots of issues that, you know, when people feel, you know, threatened by crime, they're not happy. I mean, I was in New York in 92 and you know, when Rudy Giuliani was running as the law and order candidate for mayor, you know, I mean, it's New York. It's like, you know, the heart of liberalism. And all of us are listening to Rudy going, I'm tired of people, you know, urinating on the sidewalk. And we're all like, yeah, I'm tired of that too. And everybody voted for him, you know. So, I mean, all Democrats have to be careful. But I think she's got a pretty strong team. She's got a lot of money. She's a good politician. I think that, you know, I think she can pull it off, but we'll see. You never know. The electorate seems restless. The electorate seems unknowable, which is never a good thing for the incumbent.
That's a good point right
Gene,
there.
remember this, Gene. In the last 40 years, New Mexico has only elected a governor in the same party as the White House once, Carruthers in 1986.
Interesting.
So this is a great environment for the Republican candidate to be running against an incumbent Democrat with a Democrat in the president as the president from historical statistical perspective in the state of New Mexico. So I think that, it's clear that with Ronchetti 58% in a 5-person race in the primary with a dominant performance, that I think he's well positioned heading into the general.
Senator Feldman, I want to retouch on something you just mentioned in passing a second ago in looking ahead to the 3 U.S. House races. The most intriguing to me will be the newly minted CD2, of course, being defended by Republican incumbent Yvette Herrell. A lot of that seat, of course, abuts CD1 up here in the Albuquerque area. What does that do to campaigning, confusion? I mean, there's a lot of different factors going on here.
Well, yes, this is a whole new ballgame now for CD2 because it includes the South Valley of Albuquerque and parts of the West Side. And it will tilt more Democratic this year as a result of redistricting. And so it's going to be more of a race. And also, I think Representative or Congresswoman Herrell has proven herself to be really right wing and made a lot of statements that will not sit well with her new constituents. And so I think that unless she gets up here and starts really campaigning like crazy, and I've seen her maybe once in this area, she's going to have quite a challenge from Gabe Vasquez, who is well known in the South and was a city councilor in Las Cruces and is a very energetic campaigner. So we'll see what happens there. But that's certainly going to be a race that turns out Democratic voters. And that will, of course, have an impact on the governor's race as well. So just as this time, the having no contest at the top of the Democratic ticket depressed Democratic turnout somewhat in this primary, I think having this hot race in the South is going to help the Democrats.
Good point there. Dave, the other 2 U.S. House races are close to home. District 1 here, incumbent Democrat Melanie Stansbury takes on Republican Michelle Garcia Holmes again. And in District 3, incumbent Democrat Teresa Leger Fernandez faces Alexis Martinez Johnson. Familiar names in oppositions there, but the obvious question, are those safe seats for Democrats, or all that we're talking about here make it a little bit different than safe?
Well, I mean, define safe seat. Anything is possible. But also, don't forget, all 3 of these districts are new. And, and I know that it was very much looked at that the Democrats in the state legislature were in charge, and they thought, well, we can fix this. But sometimes you do with the best intentions, you cause things that you weren't expecting. And so, and again, I think turnout is going to be key. I mean, when you look at it, up north in Teresa Leger, her district, they've been dislocated on a massive scale. I mean, I don't know if it affects 1 or 2 or 3 points or 10 points, the number of people that have been, dislodged because of these fires. So we don't know. And, that the number 3 thing is new, but if you ask the average person, they have no idea what their congressional boundaries look like. So,
I'm getting that feedback from a lot of people right now, especially in the South Valley area that Dee Dee mentioned. It's a lot of crossover. It's news to a lot of people at this point. It's
I think, Gene, I think there's going to be I think there's a couple of things on the congressional races. One is, I think Senator Joseph Cervantes got his wish. And he's been, since I was in the legislature, he's been talking about making all the districts more competitive, and all the districts are more competitive now. The Republican one's a little more competitive for D's. Now, I still think it's a leaning Republican seat, And that I think it's the first congressional district. No, the third one is more competitive for ours now than it was in the past. I think a couple things to be said about these upcoming congressional races. Dee Dee's right. There's going to be a push by Democrats, but the Republicans aren't going to go asleep at the wheel. Right. I mean, you're going to see southeastern New Mexico. I think if they've done anything to energize southeastern New Mexico, there's a reason why those of us that didn't live here refer to this as the Emerald City. And so when you start saying, hey, listen, we're going to let people from Albuquerque decide who represents Roswell, you're going to get more people to turn out. And I think you're going to find that there may be some people who cross party lines for geographic lines to support keeping somebody close to home.
Interesting points there. We'll be keeping an eye on campaign season in the coming weeks and months ahead of the general election, of course. Thank you once again to our line opinion panelists. We'll see you back at the virtual roundtable one final time in less than 15 minutes. But first, an important conversation between environment reporter Laura Paskus and the chief engineer at the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. Now, as Jason Kasuga puts it, the outlook for water supply from the river is bleak.
Jason Kasuga, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Laura. Appreciate the opportunity.
So we're talking right now the second week in June, still early June. How do things look for water supplies on the Middle Rio Grande right now?
Yeah, Laura, that's a tough question, and I wish I had better news, but it's not looking very good. As we began May, we had quite a bit of water. Spring runoff was coming down, but what I don't think folks realize is it was coming down early, which meant that it was going to end early, and we're seeing that process of the amount of native water that we have available to us in the Middle Rio Grande coming to an end. And the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District this week started, late last week started release of our San Juan Chama water to augment native flow, which is very early on when we would normally have to start doing that. So I would say the water situation, unfortunately, is looking pretty bleak.
So what can farmers expect, do you think, in the coming weeks?
So we're going to just face generally a downward trend on the amount of water that we can divert to the point where we won't divert anything else. We're going to reach a point in time where water delivery to non-Pueblo farmers will kick in, and we'll only be delivering what we call prior and paramount water to tribal communities. And short of getting rain, the amount of water that non-tribal farmers can expect is going to be very little, and in some cases none.
Mm-hmm. So MRGCD held a special meeting at the end of May, and I heard you say in that meeting multiple times that if irrigation deliveries are stopped in the coming weeks, that doesn't mean that the district has ended the irrigation season. It means that there's no water. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so oftentimes I think when we're talking in our board meetings, people get this idea that we at the MRGCD are literally turning off the faucet, if you will. And in this instance, we are not. MRGCD will be open for business, and if we have water to route and move to farmers, we will do that. The problem is we are just running out of the precious resource that we route to farmers. And so without rain, I expect maybe as early as the 15th of this month, to have very little to no water to divert and to deliver to our non-Pueblo agricultural community right now. And that will stay that way until we get rain, and if we get rain. And if we get a substantial amount of rain where we can divert that and route it to farmers, we will do that. So in that sense, we are open for business. We just don't have the resource to deliver to folks.
So I'm sure that, I know that farmers in the district understand this, but I just kind of wanted to lay out for the audience, like the Rio Grande isn't necessarily like just a naturally flowing river anymore. There's a series of reservoirs and diversions, and the water moves from place to place, and different states, different entities have different water rights that can be held in different reservoirs. Where does the MRGCD store its water, and what's the status of that stored water right now?
So Laura, historically MRGC has stored its water at El Vado Dam. El Vado Dam is owned and operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, and MRGCD is the non-federal partner with Reclamation with Elvado. We pay O&M for it, but the Bureau of Reclamation manages it and does all the operations. And Elvado Dam is currently going through a rehabilitation under the Bureau of Reclamation Safety of Dam program. And so it is not available to us to store native water. And so without having the ability to store water, we truly are what we call a run-of-the-river system. We are beholden to what is produced in the upper elevations from a snowpack standpoint or from the amount of rain that we get. And we have no really ability to supplement that through native storage. One of the other things I think is worth mentioning there is that New Mexico is currently in debt under the Rio Grande Compact, which also limits our ability to store and would limit our ability to store even if Elvado was functioning. And so, yeah, we just face almost a perfect storm. Extreme drought, infrastructure that has to be fixed, and then the debt under the Rio Grande Compact affecting the Middle Valley. And it's all coming to a head at one time.
So we've seen the river in steady decline for decades, and we've seen temperatures rising for decades. It feels to me like this year shouldn't be a huge surprise to people, and yet it feels like a crisis. Do you know, like, how are farmers planning to adapt to this year?
Or I think it's different across the board. I think you have seen some of the farming community adapt and adapt previously as we had kind of signs of what was coming, drier years. But realistically, what I tell our team at the MRGCD is I don't think anybody has faced what we're facing from a management standpoint this year. Not having Elvado Dam, the extent to being in compact debt that we are, and then the conditions that we have related to the drought. Right, and so I think what the drought is going to do, and I say the drought because even if we get the infrastructure fixed and we get more in compliance with our compact debt, I do think we're going to face a hydrologic reality where we're just the system is producing less water. And so I think that we have enough infrastructure on this river to not just weather it, but hopefully to thrive. But there's a lot of work to be done, both on the farming side, looking at the efficiency operation within an individual farmer's field. MRGCD is doing that same thing now as we look at our system. How can we move water more efficiently and get it to farms more efficiently? And then any type of infrastructure farmers need to invest in for drought resiliency. I know many farmers have invested in drought resiliency wells that they can supplement when the district can't make deliveries. And I think folks are going to have to take a more realistic look at that as they go forward, because I expect that we will continue to face a very difficult hydrologic reality for some time. That is not something, while I hope it's different, and my wish is that it's different, I just don't think that's what that we're seeing, and I don't think it's going to be a trend that turns around very quickly.
Are there concerns that as people can't get surface water, that they start drilling wells and using groundwater? And could we potentially kind of end up in a situation like in the lower Rio Grande where there's compact issues between Texas and New Mexico because of that groundwater pumping?
Yeah, Laura, I think that as I look down on that lower section and the implications down there and just then look at the Middle Valley, I think it's right to be concerned with pumping and the degree. I think one of the things that we as New Mexicans will have to do is put in systems, I think, to monitor that pumping, to essentially take that bull by the horns, and because I think that's what it's going to take, because it is the same cup of water, right? I was explaining this to a different individual the other day. Imagine a cup of water with a straw in it. Surface water drinks it from the top, pumping just drinks it from the bottom, right? And so it is the same cup, and I think we have to be mindful of that. I do think there is a right balance that we can get to, but on MRG-CD side, we don't manage wells. That really comes from the Office of the State Engineer. Our game is primarily in surface water, right, from a delivery standpoint. So there is, I think, needs to be collaboration and coordination, get a better understanding of the amount of pumping that's already going on in the Middle Valley that maybe we don't know about, which I think there is quite a bit of pumping that's going on in the Middle Valley that we don't know about, and start slowly but surely bringing that into an understanding and regulating that. But I think nothing can be off the board right now. I think the drought is going to be a great equalizer in this, and it's going to cause us to continue to look at these things and get better. And I say drought, and I mean just our hydrologic reality right now, because drought sometimes implies that it's coming and going, and
Right.
I just don't know if that's what we're seeing. And so I think the right term is our current hydrologic reality, and that may be this way for some time.
So I don't want to scare people, but I want to underscore the seriousness of this year. So Jason, any final words about, the outlook for this summer?
Yeah, and I don't know if, and it may scare folks, but that's not my intent. My intent, I think, and my job is to speak the truth and be transparent. I think people deserve to know how difficult it's going to be. And hopefully, Laura, what I'm hoping by opportunities like this and other times I've been able to talk with the media is that we can get the message out there. I still think there's a lot of folks in the Middle Valley that are not in tune from a water situation on what we're facing, not just in the Middle Valley, but in New Mexico as a whole. What we're facing, I think the community needs to understand, is not exclusive to New Mexico. If you look at the greater part of the Southwest, from a drought watch standpoint, we are either in exceptional to severe drought. That's a reality for the whole Southwest. What we're dealing with in the Middle Valley is the same, just on a different scale to what they're dealing with on the Colorado River. And so what I want to tell folks in the community is that I think there's a path forward, but I do think that the conversation on drought, how we manage our water, I think the conversations we need to have among our federal agencies and some of the overlapping authorities that limit, I think, the usefulness of infrastructure that we have has to be an important conversation going forward, because I don't know that this river needs more infrastructure. It needs to make use of the infrastructure that we have, and the more people that know about this issue, I think then can begin to influence, I think, some of these changes from authorities to laws, if laws need to be changed, and partnerships that need to be had. But that starts by getting the community informed about what we face, right? And I will say that I'm getting more and more calls now from folks that are just not even in the benefited area of the district, trying to understand what the communities that they are historically going to, like if they visit Corrales or they visit the Bosque, or they go north a little bit and like to hike along the river, right? The more folks that get involved, I think, can help turn these conversations as we deal with these infrastructure issues, these authorities, and hopefully get all of us water management agencies generally marching in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jason, thanks so much for talking with me.
Appreciate the opportunity, Laurie. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to our Line Opinion panel for a final discussion this week. After a scalding hot week across the state, we could be getting rain soon, monsoon as the word is known. That's as we work through a historic fire season, the largest ever in state history already. Now, when do we need to start shifting our concern to the threat of flooding on those fire-damaged lands? Senator Feldman, let me start with you. You've seen a lot of fires here. Should we be concerned right now?
Yes, thunderstorms are not a blessing. Not only can they light new fires, but because of the Calf and Hermit's Peak fires burned so hot and on such steep slopes, the soil is just parched. And so there's a great danger that the ash will run off down into the acequias, down into the reservoir like Story Lake near Las Vegas, and really clog up the system. I remember how after the Conchas fire, the Jemez River ran black, and the Rio Grande was black as well.
Yep.
I think that could well happen as a result of flash flooding. And remember also how the Dixon orchards were destroyed after that fire, and that fire was really, really hot too. And so it really just took out bridges on the Santa Clara Reservation and up near Cochiti. And it was a real disaster that it took years to recover from that as well.
Yep, exactly right. Dave, we got expecting a visit from President Joe Biden in the next few days. We know he's going to go to Santa Fe to meet with the governor, but we don't know yet if he's going to survey the damage firsthand. That kind of a typical presidential visit. How important is it for him to see the catastrophe with his own eyes when it comes to policy and things like that?
Well, I think, so much of being president these days is visual. It's the picture, it's the TV spot, gets covered on the news. I think it's important to show up. I think it's important to understand, and I think that he obviously knows the governor. I think he's here in support of the governor. But on a very real thing, I think if a president shows up and he sees the amount of damage, it doesn't hurt for when he puts his finger on the scale to figure out how much money should be sent. And, from the reports that we're getting, there's a tremendous amount of damage up north. The biggest wildfire in the history of the state is not to be taken lightly. And, so I think it's important if the president shows up and he sees the damage, and it makes it helpful if he gets more money, because really money won't solve all the problems, but it won't hurt either. That's one of the, and when we start having these disasters, like, a lot of people's livelihoods taking wood out of the forests are now gone. We have a, potentially very threatening flood season coming. So nothing is good here. So yes, he should show up. He should say, basically, here's my checkbook. I'm signing a very big check for you guys. Well, let me know what else you need, and I'll be here for you. That would be my suggestion.
Let me stay with you, Dave, on that very point. There's a lot of issues now about who should pay for the damage, all that kind of thing. Should the president
Maybe the people who set the fire should pay for the damage.
That's right. Should the president be prepared to say flat out, we're going to solve this financially, and maybe surround himself with some families that have been affected?
I mean, yes, I think he should be prepared because, fire policy, if it doesn't matter if it's New Mexico or California or wherever we're looking, fire policy just simply doesn't work. It hasn't worked in the last 50 years. Some people would say the last 100 years. I don't know. I'm not an expert on fire policy. But, we are if we're dealing with climate change, we are going to have more fires. I think this is one of those areas where people need to understand who you vote for and who you elect matters, because this is the kind of problem that government should undertake. We need new ideas, we need new policies, and we need new ways to sort of attack these problems. And so who you vote for really does matter.
See, I think that's the opportunity, David, is have the president look a camera in our state right in the eye and say we're going in a new direction about how we fight these fires. Daniel was mentioned a little bit earlier about, of course, this is the largest fire season ever in New Mexico, 2 largest fires in state history, sparked within a couple of months. How can we find more urgency on this issue? What needs to be done?
Same thing I've said for years, Gene. Get the federal government out of managing the forests and turn it over to the people that are actually successful at managing the forests. You go anywhere in New Mexico, you can see the line between the natives, the native reservation lands, and the national forests that abut each other. You go on the reservation, unbelievably well kept versus the forest, and we're not even utilizing the individuals that have the best knowledge to take care of the forests across our state. So yeah, I think that this could potentially, the presidential visit could potentially be a problem for Democrats in New Mexico, only because you have a fire in a northern part of New Mexico that was lit by government officials, by the federal government, and now the federal government's going to show up, and there's going to be optics with the federal government saying, you may wind up finding that all the Democrat candidates for office are in Washington, D.C. on the same day raising money as the president's in New Mexico visiting. There may not be a lot of people from New Mexico that want to be seen right now with the perception of the feds being the ones that started this fire. But we've got to do something. I'm hoping at some point, I don't care what party figures out, that the government's answer to managing and conserving our federal lands is an unabated failure and it needs to be changed.
Senator Feldman, again, if I'm on the president's team, I'm saying this is an empathy visit. We're going to talk to families. We're going to surround you with families. We're not going to surround you with official U.S. Forest Service people because they're sort of the bad guys right now, as Dan just mentioned. I'm curious how you think it should go with a presidential visit of this type.
Well, politicians from Washington can step in it when it comes to northern New Mexico, dating back to when I think it was John Kennedy who came to northern New Mexico during his presidential campaign and really lauded the Mondragons instead of the Mondragons, and was immediately seen as an outsider. Yeah. Now, Joe Biden has been to New Mexico before and knows New Mexico a little bit better, but he has to be very aware of the cultural aspect of this fire, and of this part of the country, which is quite unique, very different from California, where he's visited fires before, or other places, and be very cognizant of the history of protest, as Dan has mentioned, against the Forest Service. And against and it's a tradition in northern New Mexico to be against the fire service ever since the Tierra Amarilla raid, and so he would do well, I think, to acknowledge that mistakes have been made, and that he's going to be searching for solutions and working with the acequias and the local residents to rebuild and restore what is a treasure of New Mexico that has been destroyed.
That's right.
It's the heart of New Mexico, as far as I'm concerned.
He's walking into a lot of anger. It's going to take all the political, prowess that he has here. Thanks again to our line panel as always this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. I want to circle back to our panel discussion on the flooding worry we are facing with our upcoming monsoon season by looking back at 2011 and the mess for the beloved Dixon Apple Farm and the flooding damage they suffered after the Los Conchas fire back then. Now, we have links to some dramatic cell phone footage on our social media pages. That footage was recorded by a member of Cochiti Pueblo. It's jolting, and while it may be water, it doesn't look like it, since the burnt ash made it look like some sort of boiling black death as it rips through the orchard. I was also struck then at the words of then Land Commissioner Ray Powell, who negotiated the sale of the devastated land to the state and the adjacent Pueblo following the flooding. When Mr. Powell said, quote, "With the continued flood risk, it's going to be a decade or decades before anything can be done with the orchard," end quote. Now, keep in mind the orchard was 8,800 acres large and it was gone in short order. There was also the Santa Clara Pueblo flood and the Frijoles Canyon flood in August of that year as well. Now, Mr. Powell's words should be front and center in our thoughts and planning to mitigate the harm of flood, of ash-laden water and what it can cause. It costs the family their business, and it certainly cost all of us losing an annual family fall tradition. It may be time to put some serious resources into getting in front of the curve on flooding in predicted burn areas at the same rate as fighting the fires themselves. Now, burn scars heal certainly, but water damage to this scale is an equally serious problem for our state. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.